Hi there. Welcome back to Carl and Rick Talk Risk. Rick, how are you doing?
Oh man, I tell you, but you just get jealous. So, we should just get going.
Don't go around any bulls today, Rick. Not with that shirt.
Oh, hey, bulls are afraid of me.
That's
They're the
right.
ones that get the heck out of the way. There aren't many advantages to being, shall we say, a little on the plus side, but
Yeah.
there are some.
Well, yeah, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're enjoying our podcast. This is the 12th episode, Rick. I don't know if you realize that, but it's gone fast. Um, yeah, go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, tell us your thoughts. We're always keen to hear it. And Rick, I do have an audience suggestion on a topic for next time, so I'll tell you about that afterwards. Um, so today we want to talk about geopolitical risk, and this has come to the attention of a lot of risk managers, so much so that the PRMIA, which is the Professional Risk Managers International Association, their Netherlands chapter hosted an event this past week, and invited a few panelists from the large banks here, and they presented on how to think about geopolitical risk. So I attended that. I was very keen to hear what they had to say about all the tensions that we see around the world today. And Rick, I was sitting there listening to these three presentations and then the Q&A, and what I heard is, the analysts are really focused on individual countries. They've been forced into looking at geopolitical risk and, elections and all this kind of stuff, but their background is credit analysts looking at, sovereigns and trying to understand how they work and how their financial situation and are they going to pay up on their bonds. um, they weren't they didn't set out to look at geopolitical risk, so I thought that was kind of interesting, because geopolitical risks are overarching, right? The one that comes to my mind most recently is the farmer protests in Europe. They're happening in Paris, Brussels. They happened in the Netherlands last year. They did happen this year as well, and Germany as well. And if you just look at a single country, you might miss some of the stuff. Um, so, yeah, the presentations were good. They were very detailed. If you want to look at impact and likelihood and really get into some of the weeds, I think they were excellent. But I felt like there was a perspective that was sort of missing. That's, I think, much needed in risk management today. Um,
Well, let's take a little step back first.
hmm.
For my small little brain, define geopolitical risk.
To me, um, it's well, I think it's partly in the name that it sits at the intersection of in geography and politics. We spoke earlier in one of our first episodes about Peter Zeihan, and he looks at geography. How does the geography of a country affect its
Mhm.
outlook on the rest of the world? How well it can defend itself, produce its own food, and so on. So I think it's kind of a mingling of those two things, like geography and how that affects their politics.
Yeah, but you see, it comes down to risk.
Mm.
And to me, we would be a lot farther ahead if we talked about geopolitical uncertainty rather than geopolitical risk.
Right.
Okay. Uh, Geopolitical uncertainty is key. And again, uncertainty brings in the fact that we simply do not know what's going to happen going forward. And again, the emphasis, and I realize I beat this horse repeatedly, but risk has good and bad elements to it, and risk is about the future. And in geopolitical risk in particular, has next to it has everything to do, in my opinion, with culture and politics. It's about groups of people, and in our increasingly global world, actually, let's forget about saying increasingly global world. In our global world,
Mm.
um, the mix of people, this is all complex.
Mm.
And uh, almost always when geopolitical risk is discussed, first off, it's on an individual country, as you talk about, which is, it's kind of like asking me how my day is, and I tell you about my pencil sharpener. Okay, it just misses the point.
Yeah.
And it's all about people. And in every presentation on geopolitical risk I've been to, I've never heard a single damn thing about people
Yeah.
or culture.
Yeah.
Okay, it's numbers, numbers, numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I refuse to be a number.
Yeah. Well, we're risk managers, Rick. We really like numbers. No, but you're so right. And if I think back on the examples from that presentation, one of them was the upcoming U.S. election. And the analysis was about, well, what are the expectations around cooperation with Europe on certain things? What's going to happen to NATO if Donald Trump is elected? And
What's
these
going
are
to
all,
happen to NATO if Donald Trump doesn't get elected?
yeah, exactly. That's all interesting, but like, why are people voting for Donald Trump? What's the underlying cultural drivers? What's behind the frustration of the farmers? I think I think that's more interesting. It's kind of like a cause and effect conversation. We're hearing a lot about the effects or projected effects. But I think geopolitics is understanding the causes, like what's underlying all of this.
C. Wright Mills, again, I'll come back to him, more or less considered to be the father of sociology, talked about the term sociological imagination.
Mm.
And I think that if you brought in a modernist um, anthropologist, a social anthropologist, that would be a far more informative and useful geopolitical risk discussion than
Mm.
bringing in an economist. Um,
Yeah.
a geopolitical risk discussion, in my mind, and yes, here I'm bidding things, black and white solely because it's, you know, gets people's blood pressure up. But a geopolitical discussion that has a number in it, the first number that pops up, everyone ought to get up and walk out of the room. Okay? Because, for example, how do let's take the good risk scenario rate, or one of the good risk scenarios in geopolitical risk right now, Haiti. And the reason I say that it's a good risk is because going forward, I don't see how anything could get worse there based upon what I've read. It can only get better. So let's
Yeah.
call it a good risk. And I don't mean that to be, uh, uh, I'm not saying that to be sarcastic or be dismissive. It's a truly horrible situation.
Yeah.
But instead of everyone's analyzing how we got here. Well, great.
Yeah.
We know how we got here. Well, actually, we don't. We have, if you read, 50 commentaries on it, you'll get 90 opinions.
Yeah.
But instead of focusing on way forward, it's, everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else about what went wrong. And that's not good risk management in my mind.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's, just one of many, NATO, I think, is a very interesting one.
Mm.
Okay. Uh, Obviously, we're wondering what's happening and by the way, I'm not trying to support anyone on either side of the US election here.
Mhm.
You know, perhaps off the record, which I realize you're not going to edit this out, but I still am scratching my head how we have Biden Trump, period, full stop, end of story. But anyhow, um, perhaps Aaron Rodgers to the rescue. Um, uh, but if Trump gets elected, of course, we're all thinking, well, gee, what happens to NATO if the US pulls out? Well, what happens to NATO if uh, the US stays in and, my country of Canada continues to be a very anemic supporter?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Sooner or later, long term, that has many other unintended consequences down the road.
Yeah.
And it's funny, geopolitical risk happens over 50 years and it happens overnight, as we saw during the Arab Spring, potentially as we see with the farmer strikes in Europe.
Mhm.
But again, it all comes from the people.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah, which it gets me into you mentioned so many good things I want to comment on, but maybe let's frame it in this part. Let's say a geopolitical risk analyst position existed, and they were in the risk management team to lay out a totally different perspective and really get people thinking about this, which I think is our job as risk analysts, right? To think outside the box and challenge. I mean, I
Get
think,
people thinking. Let's stick with
yeah,
get people thinking. Yeah,
exactly.
sorry.
No, precisely. I think some level of knowledge of geography, politics. I love your suggestion of sociology, understanding how groups of people behave. I think that would be uh, is missing and would be incredibly helpful to some of these situations. Knowledge of history too. I mean, risk managers have maybe a 10-year memory. We can remember the last crisis, and we could put metrics in place and follow what the regulators telling us went wrong and what we need to do about it. But I'm talking, like you said, 50 years ago. Are there rhymes with history that we can see arising again and get in front of it, or at least have that conversation, put it out there, and get people thinking? I think that's what a good geopolitical risk analyst could do, not using numbers, but telling stories, right? Actually reminding people of what's happened. And I think that would be a really interesting addition to a risk management team, Rick. I think I would line up for that position.
I think having, perhaps I should go back and rewrite my article about what they don't teach you in risk school.
Yeah.
But perhaps we ought to have more certification courses on non-quantitative risk.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. And I think it's also following a trend in many ways, because risk management was traditionally very siloed. And then enterprise risk management came along and said, no, we need a single currency. We need everything in risk-weighted assets and, capital requirements and so on. And yeah, I kind of see this as a continuation of that, of saying, okay, we've worked out risk culture, but now, like, what are the larger narratives playing out, and how can we understand what's going on? What's happening in people's heads that are making them behave this way?
And
So
as AI comes along, again, I realize I'm repeating myself, but as AI increasingly comes along, um, uh, the non-quantitative stuff is the human-related stuff, the sociological imagination stuff, the
yeah,
stories are going to become ever more important.
yes, yeah, 100%. That's a good note to finish on. Give us your thoughts, comments. We would love to hear what you think about geopolitical risk. Are we going to see the rise of a geopolitical risk analyst? Let's see. Rick, until next week. Have a good one.
Have fun, everyone. Kick butt.